I had never expected a simple dinner to feel like stepping into another world. I was tired, exhausted from the long day, and more than a little cynical about people. When he slid his credit card across the table, I didn't think much of it, until the total hit my eyes. $20,000. My hands trembled and my mind raced, trying to make sense of the generosity. "Are you serious?" I whispered, half laughing, half shocked. He smiled softly, a knowing glint in his eyes, as if he had been waiting for me to notice something deeper, something unspoken. I wanted to ask why, but the words stuck in my throat. There was a warmth about him. Not just the money, not just the act. It was personal, almost intimate, as though he had chosen me out of a crowd for a reason I didn't yet understand. I felt my heart quicken, a mixture of gratitude, curiosity, and a strange excitement that made every mundane worry vanish for a moment. The restaurant buzzed around us, but I was frozen in that instant, acutely aware that my life had just shifted in a way I couldn't yet name. Every gesture, every glance from him hinted at layers beneath the surface, and I knew that this encounter would stay with me far longer than the tip itself. It wasn't just money. It was a silent message, an invitation into a story I hadn't even realized I was part of. That night, I sat on my couch, still replaying the incredible tip in my head, when my phone buzzed with a news alert that made my stomach drop. The headline was sharp, almost cruel in its brevity. Local millionaire dies suddenly. My heart froze. I barely knew him. Just a few hours ago, he had smiled at me, handed me a tip that could change my life, and now, he was gone. Confusion collided with guilt. Why did I feel such a weight for someone who had been nothing more than a stranger moments before? Images of his calm demeanor at the restaurant, the way he had looked at me, seemed almost like memories of someone I had known for years. I remembered how his voice had carried a subtle warmth, how his eyes had hinted at unspoken stories, perhaps regrets, or quiet wisdom. I could see him again in my mind, leaning slightly forward, leaning into the conversation with a rare attentiveness that made me feel seen. How strange it was that in mere minutes, a human connection could feel so fragile and irreplaceable. I kept replaying our short exchange, his polite nod, the laughter we shared when he noticed my hesitation at accepting such a generous tip. I wished I had asked more questions, had lingered a little longer, had listened more carefully to the hints that suggested he carried deeper layers beneath the surface. Now, knowing he wouldn't return, every nuance of that interaction felt amplified, weighted with meaning I couldn't yet unpack. The grief wasn't just for the man himself. It was for the unfinished conversations, the lost chances, and the eerie sense that his presence had touched something in me I hadn't realized needed touching. Even as the reality of his passing sank in, I couldn't shake the feeling that the brief connection had left an indelible mark, a reminder of how fleeting generosity and human attention could be. And with that, a strange, haunting question formed in my mind. Why had he chosen me, and what had he seen that no one else had noticed? The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about the tip, and in a moment of weak judgment, I mentioned it to my family during breakfast. I watched their faces carefully, noting the subtle shifts in their expressions. My mother's eyebrows lifted just slightly, a flicker of interest passing through her eyes before she masked it with a casual sip of coffee. My father, on the other hand, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, as though weighing the implications in silence. My siblings exchanged glances that were too quick to be innocent. 20,000, really? My sister asked, a tone that was equal parts disbelief and something else I couldn't quite place. I hesitated before answering, the weight of secrecy pressing down on me. I felt torn. Should I share more, or protect the story? Protect the man who had trusted me, even unknowingly, with something personal. I could almost hear their thoughts in the pauses between words. What would they do if they were in my place? What kind of advantage could they seize if I let them in on the secret? Their curiosity was natural, I told myself, but the subtle hints of greed gnawed at me. Even in my own head, the internal struggle raged. Loyalty to a stranger who had briefly touched my life, versus the temptation to let the money and attention become a shared story. The conversation ended casually, but I could feel the tension lingering like a charged wire in the air, a prelude to conflicts I hadn't yet imagined. That moment was small, almost trivial, but looking back, it was the first crack in the facade of family unity, a glimpse of the shadows that would grow longer in the days to come. I left the table feeling both guilty and wary, knowing that some secrets, once revealed, could never be fully contained, and that this one had the potential to unravel much more than just my own conscience. Days later, I found myself sitting in a quiet, wood-paneled office with the other attendees, waiting for the reading of the millionaire's will. The air was thick with anticipation, murmurs floating between the hushed voices. My palms were sweaty, heart racing, and a part of me clung to the hope that his generosity might extend beyond the restaurant table. The lawyer cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses, and began. To my family and closest associates, I leave the following. Each line was met with soft gasps, polite nods, or the shuffle of papers. My stomach tightened. When the moment came, I realized there was no mention of me, no acknowledgement of the brief connection we had shared, no trace of gratitude for the way he had singled me out with that incredible tip. I felt frozen, my throat tight, words lodged somewhere between disbelief and heartbreak. "Are you serious?" I whispered to myself, unable to contain the rising panic. Beside me, my cousin leaned forward, whispering with a smirk. "Looks like you weren't special after all." I wanted to snap, to defend the connection, but what could I say? I had nothing to claim, no legal right, no formal bond, just memory and gratitude. The room seemed to tilt around me, a blur of polite congratulations, murmured congratulations, and selfish smiles. I kept seeing flashes of him at the restaurant, smiling softly, tilting his head as if he knew something I didn't. The absence of my name in the document felt like a cruel twist of fate, a dagger disguised as paper. My mind raced. Did he really not care? Or was there a deeper reason behind this omission? Questions spun endlessly, each one stabbing harder than the last. I could feel tears prickling, but I swallowed them, refusing to give them the satisfaction of public display. Around me, whispers continued, subtle judgments mingling with excitement at inheritances gained. "I always knew he favored the wrong people," my uncle muttered, barely sotto voce, and I bit my lip to keep from responding. The moral and emotional tension pressed down like a physical weight. I had been acknowledged only briefly in life, and now even that trace seemed erased. The contrast between the generosity at the dinner table and this stark exclusion was overwhelming, leaving me in a haze of shock, disbelief, and grief that felt both personal and profound. As the lawyer handed me the envelope containing the will, something else fell out. Almost overlooked. A folded piece of heavy cream stationery, tucked neatly inside. My fingers trembled as I unfolded it, the handwriting delicate yet deliberate. The words on the page immediately drew me in, each sentence carrying a weight far beyond what I had imagined. He wrote that he had admired my honesty, the way I treated others without expectation, and my quiet compassion that so often went unnoticed. I could feel his presence in the strokes, his appreciation tangible, almost intimate, as though he had chosen to reach me in this small, private way, rather than through grand gestures or public acknowledgement. But then came the painful revelation. He explained that he could not include me in his will due to legal constraints, complicated entanglements, and family obligations that had been unavoidable, leaving me out of the formal inheritance. My heart ached, a mix of sorrow and gratitude clashing in a storm of emotion. I read the lines over and over, feeling both the sting of absence and the warmth of recognition. Every word reminded me that, though I would not receive his fortune, he had seen me, valued me, and trusted me enough to express his feelings honestly. The contrast between the cold legality of the will and the heartfelt sincerity of this letter was stark, intensifying the ache in my chest. I thought about the brief moments we had shared, his soft smile, the subtle way he had acknowledged me, and for the first time since his passing, I felt a deep, bitter-sweet connection. The letter left me contemplative, introspective, and strangely comforted, grieving not only for what I had not received, but also for the quiet affirmation that I had mattered to someone remarkable, if only fleetingly. It didn't take long for the whispers and subtle nudges from my relatives to begin. At family dinners, the conversation shifted ever so slightly, always circling back to the will, the inheritance, and the money I could legally contest. "You should think about claiming your share," my uncle said one evening, his voice carefully casual but edged with expectation. My cousins chimed in, each comment layered with an undertone of envy, as though my hesitation was a slight against them. I could feel the weight of their eyes on me, measuring, judging, silently asking why I wasn't grabbing what some would call my due. The internal conflict grew with each passing hour, a relentless tug-of-war between the morals I had always clung to and the tantalizing lure of sudden wealth. I thought about the generosity he had shown me, the letter that had revealed his admiration, and the brief connection that meant more to me than any money ever could. Claiming the inheritance felt like betraying that trust, like stepping over a line I wasn't ready to cross. Yet the temptation pressed heavily, whispering of comfort, security, and the life I could suddenly have. I found myself replaying their comments in my mind, analyzing every tone, every glance, trying to gauge whether they genuinely cared about me or only the potential gain. The more they pressed, the more I felt the chasm between our values, a stark contrast that made me question not just them, but also my own resolve. Nights were restless, sleep broken by the constant loop of moral questions. Should I honor the letter and my conscience, or give in to the pressure and claim what the law technically allowed? Each day, the tension mounted, and the line between family loyalty and personal integrity blurred, leaving me both anxious and resolute, caught in a storm I had never anticipated, but could not ignore. Word spread quickly, faster than I expected, and soon even distant relatives and family friends began offering their advice. Each conversation felt like a subtle interrogation, a test of my judgment and character. "I don't understand why you wouldn't contest it," a cousin remarked over lunch, voice heavy with disbelief. $20,000 is nothing to leave behind. "Are you sure you're thinking clearly?" I smiled politely, nodding. But inside, a tangle of emotions churned. Their disbelief felt like judgment, their words carrying an invisible weight that pressed on my chest. I could sense the FOMO in their eyes, the subtle fear that someone else, someone like me, might be getting ahead, quietly, without fanfare or ostentation. Status became the unspoken language of the room, the wealth they had, the connections they flaunted, the careful way they measured everyone around them. I realized that by choosing not to fight for the inheritance, I had stepped outside the expected hierarchy, challenging the norms of their world without even intending to. Their judgment stung, a reminder of how easily society equates worth with money, and how quickly generosity or moral choice can be mistaken for naivete. I felt the contrast sharply. Their concern for status, recognition, and material gain against my quiet resolve to honor what I believed was right. It wasn't just about money. It was about values, perception, and power. I wrestled with the discomfort, feeling both isolated and oddly empowered. I could see the unspoken whispers, the sideways glances, the subtle comparisons, yet through it all, I held on to the awareness that my choice, though questioned and mocked, reflected integrity rather than greed. That awareness offered a quiet strength, even as societal pressure, envy, and class tension swirled around me like a storm I had no choice but to endure. Late at night, I found myself alone in my apartment, replaying the moments I had shared with him. Every detail returned vividly, the way he had tilted his head slightly when listening, the gentle tone of his voice, the glimmer of kindness that seemed almost intentional. Those flashes felt like beacons, guiding me through the chaos of my thoughts. I thought about how easily my family had shifted from curiosity to subtle pressure, how greed had crept into casual conversation, and how quickly relationships could twist when money was involved. My mind drifted between options. I could quietly walk away, honoring his letter and the moral connection we had shared. Or I could strike back in some form, a subtle revenge, exposing my family's hypocrisy, letting them see the reflection of their own avarice. The temptation pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat, a powerful current against the river of principle I had tried to follow. I imagined the satisfaction of revealing their greed in a carefully calculated way, the justice of making their intentions transparent without stooping to the level of their pettiness. Yet even as the idea danced in my head, I felt guilt creeping in. Was I betraying the man who had trusted me in his own subtle, quiet way by turning his absence into a stage for vengeance? Emotional highs surged when I considered the potential to reclaim dignity and control, to prove that morality could coexist with clever strategy. But lows followed swiftly, heavy as lead, as doubt gnawed at me. Could I navigate this path without losing myself in the process? Each flashback, each recollection of his warmth and subtle attention, anchored me, reminding me that whatever I chose, it had to reflect the values he had quietly recognized in me. The night stretched long, every heartbeat echoing the tension between desire, ethics, and the unspoken promise of justice. By the time dawn crept over the skyline, I felt a mixture of clarity and uncertainty, knowing that my next steps would define not just how my family viewed me, but how I viewed myself, and the way his brief but meaningful presence would continue to shape my decisions. The charity gala was buzzing with laughter, clinking glasses, and polite conversation, but I felt a nervous tension humming through my veins. I had agreed to attend at the insistence of a legal advisor who had hinted at a possibility I hadn't considered. The millionaire had left a note detailing a hidden trust dedicated to acts of kindness, specifically tied to people who embodied the integrity he admired. As the auction began, I watched my family circulate, their chatter laced with quiet boasting about who might benefit, who might inherit, their eyes occasionally flicking to me as if challenging my silence. Then, in a moment that seemed orchestrated by fate itself, the auctioneer announced a special dedication, a memorial fund established by the late millionaire, publicly honoring individuals who had shown honesty, compassion, and moral courage. My name was mentioned. Gasps rippled through the room. My relatives froze mid-smile, eyes widening as the realization hit. This was the recognition they had mocked or dismissed in private, a recognition they could not claim or manipulate. The room shifted subtly, whispers rising into murmurs as the contrast became clear. I stood quietly at the podium, my posture calm, my gratitude genuine, while their carefully cultivated facades faltered under the gaze of friends, extended family, and well-heeled strangers. I could feel the FOMO and status tension crackling around them, their embarrassment palpable, a stark reflection of the values they had openly ignored. Even without a word spoken against them, their hypocrisy was exposed, their greed revealed in every stolen glance toward the fund plaque. I remembered his words, the letter he had left me, the way he had seen through superficiality and rewarded substance. For the first time since his passing, I felt a surge of empowerment, a quiet vindication that didn't rely on aggression or confrontation. My dignity remained intact, strengthened by integrity and the subtle, undeniable acknowledgement of my worth. The applause that followed felt not just like recognition from the crowd, but a personal affirmation that I had chosen the right path, navigating the tension between morality and temptation with grace. Watching my family squirm, unable to mask the sting of public exposure, I felt the first true sense of relief since this entire ordeal had begun. A mixture of sorrow, pride, and a reaffirmation that justice, though quiet and understated, could be sweeter than any monetary gain. After the public acknowledgement, I felt a strange mix of relief and lingering uncertainty. That night, I met with a trusted legal advisor, someone I had confided in since the beginning of this ordeal. As we went over the millionaire's documents, in detail, a subtle envelope slipped from between the pages, one that had gone unnoticed during the initial reading. My heart pounded as the advisor carefully unfolded it, revealing instructions for a separate philanthropic trust he had established, quietly in my name. It wasn't just money, it was a vehicle to continue acts of kindness and integrity, the very traits he had admired. I could hardly believe it. He had found a way to reward me without the formal will, honoring the bond we had shared in a deeply personal way. A surge of quiet empowerment washed over me, a sense of triumph that had nothing to do with money's surface value. I felt validated, seen, and capable, as though he had left me a torch to carry forward, a reminder that integrity mattered above all else. For the first time since his passing, I felt a clear sense of direction and purpose, my inner strength quietly reinforced. The realization settled like a warm weight in my chest. I hadn't lost, I hadn't failed, and I could move forward with both dignity and agency. This twist was subtle, almost secret, but it resonated deeply, leaving me with a profound sense of empowerment that no public recognition or monetary inheritance alone could have provided. I called my family into the living room, a quiet, deliberate summons that immediately raised eyebrows. The air was thick with expectation, each of them sensing that something was about to change. "I want to talk about all of this," I began, my voice calm but firm. My uncle scoffed, crossing his arms, while my sister shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Talk about what? The money?" she asked, her tone defensive, masking curiosity. I took a deep breath. Yes, the money, but more importantly about how everyone reacted when I chose integrity over greed. There was a pause, the room suddenly heavy with silence. I continued, recounting the public acknowledgement at the charity event, describing the trust and the personal note left by the millionaire. Each sentence exposed their assumptions, their envy, and their hypocrisy. "You mocked what you didn't understand," I said, holding their gaze. "You pressured me, whispered behind my back, and assumed I was foolish for doing the right thing. Yet here we are. I've acted with honor, and the recognition, not from you, but from those who truly understand, proves it." My words landed with precision, each one striking at the heart of their arrogance. My mother opened her mouth to argue, but closed it, a sudden flush crossing her cheeks. My cousins exchanged guilty glances, unable to offer rebuttal. The contrast was stark. They, consumed by petty ambition and status, and I, calm, dignified, and quietly triumphant. I didn't need to shout, didn't need to gesture wildly. My composure was enough. Their silence was deafening, a reflection of the power reversal that had finally settled in the room. For the first time, I felt the full weight of agency and moral victory. I had maintained my principles, exposed their flaws, and reclaimed the narrative without stooping to their level. It was not the money that mattered in this moment, but the undeniable assertion of my integrity. And as they sat, speechless and flushed with discomfort, I realized that this confrontation, long overdue, had shifted the balance entirely. In the quiet aftermath, I took a deep breath and allowed myself to finally settle into clarity. I accepted what the millionaire had left me through the trust, not as a prize, but as a responsibility, a reminder of his faith in my integrity and the values he had quietly admired. Gratitude swelled within me, tempered by the lingering ache of loss, yet I felt whole in a way I hadn't before. I thought about the chaos, the pressure, and the subtle betrayals of my family, and I realized that the true reward wasn't the money at all. It was the knowledge that I had stayed true to myself. I honored his memory by reflecting on the kindness and thoughtfulness that had guided him, letting it shape how I approached my own choices moving forward. Each lesson lingered in my mind. Generosity, subtlety, and integrity held far more power than material wealth. The karmic satisfaction was quiet, but undeniable. Those who had acted out of greed had been exposed, while I had preserved dignity and moral clarity. I smiled faintly, feeling a sense of empowerment that didn't rely on status or recognition. This was my victory. Not flashy, not public, but deeply personal. I had navigated temptation, family conflict, and grief, emerging stronger, wiser, and aligned with the principles that mattered most. In that calm reflection, I finally understood that true inheritance isn't counted in dollars. It's measured in character, the quiet victories of conscience, and the enduring lessons that shape who we become. Sitting alone that evening, I let my thoughts drift, replaying every twist, every choice, and every quiet victory. I realized that wealth, as tempting as it had seemed, could never replace the feeling of being seen, understood, or valued for who I truly am. Integrity, on the other hand, carried a weight far greater than money ever could. It gave me strength, clarity, and a sense of self that no inheritance could purchase. The Millionaire had shown me that true generosity transcends financial gestures. It's about recognizing worth in others, trusting in their character, and honoring the quiet connections that shape lives. I thought of my family, their ambition clouded by greed, and felt both pity and sorrow, knowing that their lessons would be harder to learn. And yet, I couldn't shake the lingering resonance of everything I had experienced. The fleeting encounters, the letter, the trust, and the subtle ways karma and justice had unfolded. It left me with a gentle ache, a reminder that life's most meaningful moments are often unseen by the world, quietly shaping who we are. I understood now that fulfillment comes not from claiming what's ours by right, but from acting with courage, empathy, and honor, even when no one is watching. That realization settled deep in my chest, a lasting pulse that would guide me in the choices ahead, reminding me that the richest inheritance is the knowledge that I had remained true to myself, and that sometimes the quietest victories leave the loudest echoes. As I sat back and let the events of the past weeks settle, a sense of calm washed over me. I had faced temptation, witnessed greed, endured judgment, and emerged intact, guided by principles I refused to compromise. The Millionaire's quiet, wisdom and generosity had left an indelible mark, a reminder that true value is not measured in dollars, accolades, or public recognition. I glanced at my family one last time, feeling the weight of their unfulfilled ambition, their misunderstanding of what mattered most. They had chased wealth, status, and appearances, blind to the quiet power of integrity and character. I, on the other hand, had discovered a richness they could never grasp, peace of mind, moral clarity, and a connection to someone remarkable that money could never buy. And as the evening drew to a close, I realized something profound. They never understood what real wealth is, and perhaps they never would. It wasn't a boast, nor a condemnation. It was simply truth, lingering in the spaces between expectation and experience, a subtle challenge to anyone who might watch and wonder what truly matters in life. In that realization, I found closure, satisfaction, and a reflective resonance that would stay with me long after the applause, the whispers, and the fleeting judgment of others faded into memory.